Hello again. In the last video I showed you how to turn the ball into a prefab and then to manually make duplicates of it and put it into your scene. In this video I'm going to show you how to pragmatically code the instantiation of those prefabs. So let's get started. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the game manager and we're going to open it up in Visual Studio. Now, there's going to be a couple of things that we need to do to be able to instantiate the prefabs. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to need a public game object which is going to hold the reference for our prefab. So I'm going to create that field now. And the other thing that we're going to need is we're going to need some sort of structure to hold all, or a reference to all the instances of that prefab that we create. So to do that, I'm going to use an array list. So I'm going to create an array list and I'm going to call it balls. And I'm going to initialize that to a new array list. Now, for our fields, that's all we're going to need right now. Now the next step is we actually need to instantiate a prefab in code. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method and I'm going to call, well, first I got to type it right. I'm going to call that, or I'm going to make it a private method. It's going to have a return type of void and I'm going to call it add object. And in this case, actually, I'm going to call it add unity ball. The reason why I'm going to call it that is because I want to prepare for in the future when we actually have the sprite manager prefab in place, and I'm going to have a different method for instantiating that, and you'll see that in upcoming videos. But for now, we're going to just call this initial method add unity ball. Now, what I need to do is pass a couple of arguments into it. So the first one I want is going to be a game object, and I'm just going to call this game object. Let's see, what do I want to call this one? No, I'm actually going to call it. Let me make sure that I do it the way I want. Actually, I'm not going to do that at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a vector 3, and that vector I'm going to call position. What I was originally thinking was passing in the prefab, but because we've already got a field that's going to be our prefab, I'm going to leave that alone for now, and I'm going to rely on the fact that that public field is populated with the proper prefab. And I'll show you that here in a sec as well. But we're going to need a position. The reason we need a position is to instantiate a ball, we need to pass in certain values into that function. And to do that, what we're going to do is, let me get this set. What we're going to do is we're going to, let's see, what's the easiest way to do this? Let me think about that. What we're going to do is I'm going to make a game object, and I'm going to call this game object temp geo for temp game object, and I'm going to make that and instantiate of the ball prefab, and the next argument is our position because it's looking for a vector 3 position. You can see that the original is the object, second argument it takes is a position, so I'm going to give it position. The third is a rotation. Now in this case I'm going to set it up to be the quaternion identity, so I really don't want any rotation on it whatsoever to start off with. So that's going to give us our initial instance. But because we're instantiating and it's a game object, what Unity wants us to do when using C# is to cast that. Cast that as a game object. So what's happening is we're instantiating based on the ball prefab, giving it a position and a rotation, and it's going to return out a game object. We're casting what it returns as a game object and assigning it to tempGeo. Now the whole reason I use the tempGeo or temp game object is because of an issue when we actually created the initial ball. Let me show you that real quick. If you remember back towards one of the very first times that we were when we first created this, and we were creating the initial ball, and we brought in the plane, we had to rotate it because it was initially at a rotation of 0. As you can see, if we have a rotation of 0, you're not going to be able to see the plane because it's facing upwards. So what we did is we rotated that to 270 so it was facing correctly. Well, that's going to present a little problem here in code. Now, when we're in the code, the problem that it's giving us is when we instantiate the ball prefab and we give it a position and we give it the identity for its rotations, we're zeroing out all the rotations. So we're losing that rotation of where it was at 270. So to get it back, what we have to do is take the tempGeo, we have to get its transform, and then we have to rotate. And then what we rotate is a new vector. So we just do new vector. New vector 3. And we give it a rotation of 270 in the x by 0 by 0. And what that'll do is that will re-rotate the object so it's facing forward again. Once that's done, we've instantiated the object, we've fixed its rotation again. We need to add it to our array list up here called balls. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to balls, and we're going to add, and what we're going to add is going to be the temp game object. And close off that. So after we've done our rotation, we've added the ball to our array list, and that is what we need for the method for instantiating a new ball. But right now we've got the method, but nothing's calling the method. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to come up here to the start, and we're going to use a for loop. So we're going to use the for loop, and I'm going to just use the standard integer I equals 0, and while I is less than, in this case I'm going to use 5, so we get 5 balls to start, and then I'm going to increment I. Now from here all we have to do is add the Unity ball, and we're going to pass in its position. Now for a position I'm going to use new vector 3, and I'm going to give it a position of -5, and then I'm going to use a little formula here, which is going to start off at 7 in the Y position, and to that I'm going to add I times 2 units. So what I'm doing here is I'm going, for each iteration of I, when I is 0, I'm not going to be adding anything to 7. But when I is 1, I'm going to add 2 to it. So the next ball is going to start 7, or first ball is going to start 7 units above the bottom. The second's going to be 9. The third's going to be 11, and so as long as we go. The whole reason of doing that is so when we instantiate the balls, they don't all start at the exact same position and collide with each other right off the bat. We don't, because it's a 2D game, need a Z depth, so I'm going to set Z to 0. And I'm going to finish off that line of code. So that should be all the code that we need to make 5 instances of the ball. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to switch back over to Unity, and I'm going to save my changes here just in case something bad happens, and then I'm going to run the code and see if it works. So as we can see, I've got an error. It says prefab you want to instantiate is null. And the reason that is I've added the code to the game manager here. The game manager script here is associated with the game manager here, but I made a public field for prefab. But what I forgot to do is come in here and associate the prefab with that object. So what I need to do is go and grab the ball Unity prefab, drag and drop it into this field, and now when I run it, well, let me save again. When I run it, we should see the balls, and here they come. So now we've got 5 balls going and all flowing down. Now one of the things I want to point out is if we look at the stats, we've got 10 draw calls. We've got the 5 draw calls from the scene, or the level itself, and then we've got you noticed a little funkiness there. I'm going to explain that in a sec. But what we've got is we had 10 draw calls, but we've lost a couple of the balls, and the 5 were for the scenery and 5 were for the balls themselves. So that's what we're trying to do, is streamline the number of draw calls. Now let me explain what just happened, and I'm going to do that by closing stats. I'm going to pause it or stop it. I'm going to play it again. This weirdness that we're getting with the balls falling off and kind of pancaking and doing some really bizarre stuff is all because of the way the physics work. And what is happening is, if you remember, we're using a sphere collider. So the sphere collider actually is a 3D object where we just have a sprite, make it look like a sprite. So if we come up here, and let's see, I'm going to see if I can get the camera in a position so we can see what's going on. If I start playing this and then I pause it real, oops, sorry, I meant to hit pause. Alright, so if I pause it real quick and I select these and we zoom in, you can see that they're 3D spheres and that they're rolling along the edge. And this also presents an interesting problem. Our level isn't zeroed out correctly. So let me stop this animation. I'm going to grab our level, and let's move our level over some. Let's see what's going on and make sure our prefab. So that's what's happening. Our level was zeroed, and I'm going to zero it again. Sorry, Control Z. Let me select the level, and I'm going to zero it out. Alright, so now the level's zeroed out. Let me get our prefab. Our prefab is what's not zero. It's actually a little bit off. So we're going to go here. I'm going to zero out the prefab. Alright, now if I play this and then pause it, let's see what we've got going on. We're still... Alright, so all my stuff inside my level is not zeroed. Gotcha. Alright, so all the stuff inside the level isn't zeroed as well. So let me zero out everything inside the level again. There we go. Let's reposition the camera. So now the level is all zeroed out. So the very center of each level is actually along its center. Then if we select all the balls in the scene and zoom up on them, you can see that they're actually 3D spheres. And as they're rolling, they're not necessarily staying on the grid. They're moving in depth forward and backwards. And then you can see right here where they're rolling off and they're not just constrained to roll just on the Z. And the reason why is the physics doesn't know that we want to stay locked in the Z direction. So we need to accomplish a mechanism for fixing that. So to do that, we need to go back to the ball prefab. Let's close some of this other stuff down real quick. And I'm going to close that down and close the material down. Now, to fix it, what we need to do is somehow constrain these sphere colliders so they don't move in and out in depth closer and further away from the camera and roll off of our level. So to do that, we need to add another component. The component that we're going to add is going to be the configurable joint under physics. So we add that, and we come in here, and what we want to do is we want to lock the Z motion. So what we're going to do is we're going to change Z motion to locked. But if you looked at the way the prefab is made, it's not necessarily going to line up with the world Z. We've got X here, we've got Z here, and Y there, but that's not always going to be the case because we've also rotated the mesh inside of 270 degrees, so it may or may not work the way you would expect. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it to configure these this locked Z motion to be in world space and not the object space. So with that, I can delete there, and we can make sure, I selected up here, I need to select it inside the prefab itself. So inside the prefab, we've got to make sure that our configurable joint Z motion is locked and configured in world space. So now when we run this, we should see what we expect, which is all the basketballs working, bouncing around, interacting, but staying locked in depth. So they're not moving forward or backwards, and they're not going to roll off of our level. They're going to stay where they are supposed to be. And it looks like I've still missed a couple. So let me fix this up and see what I'm still missing that's not zeroed. So I've got that one that's not zeroed. I think what may have happened, and I'm pretty sure what happened, is when I redid those positions, I was in paused mode and I wasn't actually stopped. So what happens is when you make any change and the game is currently playing and you stop that, any change that you made is going to be lost. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened. So now I've got the whole level zeroed out in depth, and it looks like I finally have all the individual components of that level all zeroed out in Z or Z, depending on where you're from. So now that I've got all that done, I'm going to lock it. Our prefab's all set, and our simulation runs, and our basketballs do not fall off the level. So, and let's see, with that, that should be all we need for this video. Once again, you can see that draw calls are 10. So that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, we're going to start setting up the sprite manager to accomplish the same thing that we've got here. So I'll see you then.